This is episode 29 of the Soundproofist podcast, and my name is Carrie.
And I'm Phil.
And today we're talking to Topher White, the founder of an organization called Rainforest Connection. You might have seen stories about how Topher created a network of used cell phones in the rainforest to detect illegal logging activities. And he's been interviewed by the New York Times and spoken at TED Talks and South by Southwest, to name a few. So we'll go over some background information today on his work with the Rainforest Connection, and in particular about how audio plays a role in conservation activities. Topher also has a new project called Delta, and we're going to cover that in this episode. Delta is a new audio tool that he's developing, and this time it's not for rainforests, but something you can use in your own backyard. There's a Kickstarter campaign starting up this month, in June 2023, if you're interested in supporting this new project. And we're going to talk in this episode about what it does. So, let's get started. I thought we'd start by talking about your work with the Rainforest Connection.
Okay.
What is it? What do you do? And what made you start it?
Sure. So, at the time, this would have been back in 2011 or so, I was working in France at a place called Eder. I always wanted to be sort of attached to clean energy and climate change-oriented solutions, but mostly on the technology side, on the research side of things. And I took a trip out to Indonesia as a volunteer with my girlfriend at the time, who later became my wife. And we visited a gibbon reserve to listen to basically volunteer and take care of gibbons out there, and realized that this one pretty small gibbon reserve had a pretty big illegal logging problem. I've been sort of focused on this idea at the time that Internet of Things devices they were selling new hardware. And I thought that old smartphones were a great way to kind of be a proxy for that, because they were full of sensors, a great development platform. And so I pitched this idea to them that they could be able to detect illegal logging using potentially phones up in trees. And it was their idea more or less to focus on sound. I had a number of ideas around it, because when you're in the forest, sound is just like, it's what hits you all the time. And that's almost like an evolutionary adaptation of animals. You can't see 20 feet in front of you. You can't smell what's going on too far away. There's lots of smells, but sound really travels through the forest. And the idea was that we could pick up the sound of chainsaws at a great distance, up to a kilometer or more, especially those low frequencies, and then send real-time alerts to people on the ground. And after leaving that place, it took well over a year to develop it, but that ended up being the underlying principle. And all the challenges of how to make it work, how do you actually reliably detect chainsaws or threats in forests? How do you keep the thing powered? How do you make all that work? That's where the real spice of all this came into it. And then, of course, the ultimate challenge: what happens when you know that there's chainsaws in an area, even with people there on the ground? What can they do about it? And so that Rainforest Connection came out of the ongoing developing solutions to all of those problems over really the last 10 years or so. But ultimately, it's about sound and all the things we can do with sound on the threat detection and science side of things.
Interesting. And when you started out and you started using cell phones, did you have a particular type of cell phone you wanted to use that had particular tech qualities?
That's a great question. Sort of, conformity really came into it. We were using old Android phones at the time, and I ended up using Huawei Ideos 8150s. I could tell you everything about this like very, very old style of phone that came out of there, because it was small, because it was reliable, it didn't have too many features. And a lot of what we had to do was actually kind of tear the unnecessary things out, like remove the screen, or remove the vibratory stuff. Using the LEDs as kind of like a proxy for, or the light sensor as a proxy for feeding back between whether there was enough sunlight. There was no easy way to build PCBs to talk directly to there about how much sunlight the thing was getting. And so, there's a lot of sort of hacks we put in place based upon sensors that are built into phones. And we ended up using Android smartphones for really the first, say, 7 or 8 years of our existence. And so even though it started in 2012, the phones we're using were like circa 2008, 2009.
Did those phones go into the Guardian? Is that the name of that project?
Yeah, exactly. So the hardware we were building at the time, and it's still called the Guardian now, though it's gone through quite a few iterations, was essentially a plastic box. We had this one Radio Shack box that we used over and over again, that when Radio Shack went out of business, we had to adapt pretty quickly. Anyway, sorry. It was an old smartphone in a box with batteries and a charge controller to use the solar panels, and then a microphone sticking out. So just one microphone.
It sounds like you modified all the phones, not just connecting solar panels to them, but you actually had to kind of build a phone out of an old phone, it sounds like.
Yeah, and that was for a couple of reasons. First of all, because you want to eliminate the number of things that can go wrong, and also because almost everything on these phones uses power. Because we got a lot of criticism early on, and frankly, rightfully so. They're like, phones aren't built for this. You're essentially running a phone as a server or as an IoT device, which is hard to distinguish between those two, in my mind at least. And like, there's a lot of things on there that you don't need, and everything kind of sucks power. But as far as like our expertise at the time, especially developing hardware, it made a lot more sense to take that shortcut and eliminate the stuff that we didn't need rather than build a very specialized solution. Because we found so much of those things are built like tanks. I mean, like sometimes these things were sitting in the sun. The way it works is they were actually streaming audio out of the forest, which is sometimes, anywhere from 5 to 12 kilometers away, which takes a lot of power, which has to be due, which means these things are running at like, 70, 80 degrees Celsius for months at a time. And like, I couldn't build something that would survive that. And sometimes ants will get in there and set up a shop, and termites love the stuff. I mean, the rainforest is a terrible place to deploy hardware, which we can get into for a number of reasons. There's no sunlight, and everything wants to get in there and make its home inside. And then trees aren't tripods, they break, they move, they change, they grow, they cover things up. So yeah, but phones were a great shortcut for us because we could never, especially at that point, come anywhere close to building something that was as reliable as these major manufacturers.
So the development of something like the Guardian and this kind of iterative design, are you also like sharing those build strategies? Are these like open source, like, DIY kits that other groups could kind of model after your designs?
Great question. So I think the hardware was always, especially in the beginning, we were pretty diligent about releasing a lot of information about how we put it together. And we released like a hacker's handbook, and I'd make some videos on how to do it. And our software was always kind of open source, especially for those first 5 or 6 years. And people did try and kind of build their own. One of the funny things about the open source community, and I'm not sure if it's just a conservation technology space, is that most people would come into it and say, "This is great. I want to rebuild it from scratch. Can you help me?" And then and that just seemed to be kind of the approach. Like, "Oh, I think it's really cool what you've been working on for 5 years, but I have like a month and a half for my master's. I want to rebuild it." That kind of thing. I would never wanted to say no, because some people are brilliant and they come up with really great stuff. But yeah, I would say that open source, if I'm being out there, especially for the first half of our version, we were kind of like open source in name only. All the code was there, but open source is much more than just putting the code out there. It's like actual support and it's like maintaining things. And to be honest, that wasn't our priority.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you had enough to do.
Like we were OC open source in name only.
Well, and it's so dependent on if a community embraces it, and that's harder to predict.
And I think there have been some really great open source projects that come out of it that are far more. Ours was such a specific solution. Now, one that can be applied to different areas. It turned into a platform for various sensor stuff, but it wasn't like intended to be a platform that people could extend for any purpose whatsoever. Even though I think if they'd understood like our thinking at the time and the way things were put up, they could have. But open source is dependent entirely on documentation. And that is a much bigger priority of Rainforest Connection now, especially with our online platforms.
So you basically had 2 different avenues you needed to deal with at all times. One was building the hardware and repurposing it, and the second was the software, which...
Yeah.
So you were using Google AI, was that right?
We went into that, but it took us a few years. The way, in many cases, especially at the beginning, the way we built it was a little bit of a function of our lack of confidence in our detection capabilities. So if there was a thought that really everyone was thinking you should shoot entirely on the edge, you have these great processors, and that would have been great if we knew how to detect chainsaws, but I wasn't really confident that we could reliably. And so we built it instead to be able to send data out and then do that processing in the cloud. So we could always go back and reprocess it. And that poses challenges on the power generation, transmission side of things and reliability. So the entire thing was originally engineered based on lack of confidence in detection. And then our original detection technique was largely around detecting harmonics, which was harmonics, harmonic of chainsaws, the ways in which we could sort of pick those things out, which was the idea of Cornell Lab. I kind of rolled up to their place one morning and then like slept over in the car and then walked in and said, "Hey, can you help me detect chainsaws?" And they did. It was really nice. But then over time, we veered into machine learning. And I'd say by 2017, 18, we'd gotten into TensorFlow as the best way to detect models for chainsaws. And we had a huge data set at that point of, unfortunately, chainsaw events in the audio.
So do you think now, if you have this huge like repository and all of this time training it, is it more feasible now to like deploy the models onto the devices themselves in a future iteration and eliminate the streaming requirement?
Yes, and indeed we do. We definitely do, because we want to push. Now it's a little bit of a hybrid approach. So there's devices that can stream to the cloud. There's also devices that can't, that have more satellite connections, more messaging and SMS type stuff. So places where you can't get the audio out. Yeah, over time it's developed into more of a hybrid approach. And we do run chainsaw models on the device itself, as well as some biodiversity models on the device. And because, especially for chainsaws and things like that, where it's been running for so many years that we have great confidence in whether it is or is not a chainsaw, those make sense. We would always make sure we save the original audio data, because checking our models is hugely important. And plus, there's so much more in the data than just what you're looking for that we would never want to get rid of.
Totally.
Were you also listening for gunshots or mostly for chainsaw?
So we got into gunshot detection over the past few years. It's something that we do in the field, but it's one that is actually a huge challenge and one that's very difficult to react to in real time. Because again, the big question is, how sure are you that you want to send someone out to do it? Gunshots happen less frequently than chainsaw noises, and gunshots are also, they sound like a lot of other things, like branches breaking, any sort of loud event, and the location of them can be quite a challenge. So, but yeah, gunshots are one of the things that we are certainly trying our best to improve upon. There's a lot of others that have come in that sort of fall under the realm of threat, like in areas where there's snares, where hunters drive animals into snares with dogs. Dog barks can be considered a threat. Vehicle detection has been part of our repertoire for a long time and hugely important because, there's roads where nobody should be driving, especially not big trucks. So that can help. So the realm of threat detection is expanded into probably half a dozen different things.
One of the questions I had was, we know that you can power the devices with solar panels, which presumably give enough hours per day to do the recording, but how do you have internet access in the middle of a forest? How do you do that?
Well, it is worth pointing out, in all fairness, that powering the devices is probably at least half of what we stress about and think about all the time, because of a dynamic environment that is the forest, that is all these places, the amount of power that's required. It's normally the approach to try and bring down the amount of power required in a device. And so people do that is to transmit data less often or to have the thing run very cool and put things on the edge. We still feel that when you put things out there that aren't transmitting data, you still have to go get it. And so sometimes the fastest and cheapest way to get data out is to send it in real time all the time. It's like that whole, the fastest bandwidth is like a Volkswagen full of tapes
I haven't heard that.
you can send along. I think, yeah. And I think that sometimes the most efficient way to get data out, or like sometimes the easiest way to send a day of data is at the time that it's created real time for 24 hours. So in that case, we do, but that requires a lot more power. And so a lot of what we do is to optimize around how to create that power in an environment where trees keep growing, branches break, algae grows on things, all the rest. But yeah, that was the first half of your question. Sorry, there's the other half around.
Yeah, well, I live in San Francisco where half the time I can't get an internet connection on my cell phone in about half the neighborhoods I go to. So I can't even imagine in the rainforest trying to have a stable internet connection.
It's not stable at all. And it is very up and down. And yes, that's probably the second most difficult issue for us is ongoing connectivity. So the devices take nothing for granted. It's it's changed a lot over the years in terms of how we would send things. Latency of these connections is really, really high. The types of protocols you use really, really matter. The sort of failure modes of all this are like probably 6 or 7 steps deep on not even counting the protocols we're using, which have a lot of that stuff built in. So yes, internet connections are bad. They are going down anywhere from 10 to 200 times a day. And you just kind of deal with that and then work your way backwards through the data.
Do the devices store the data until it can be uploaded then?
Exactly.
So that you don't lose it? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So they will sort of build up these caches. And there comes a point where like there's some places sometimes where like builds up. Yeah, there's so many different variables that go into how much you want to send or not, because you can reach this runaway effect where you're just constantly running out of power because there's a very close relationship between how much you send and how much power you have. And so sometimes you want to make choices that can change that. One way or the other. And then, of course, the quality of the data that you're capturing, which can be dependent upon what you're mostly listening for. The good news is that most threats, not counting gunshots, are in the low range. So you don't need to capture a very high sample rate of audio to pick up chainsaws or trucks or things like that. So that's helped us to a certain degree. But as we veer more into biodiversity and we want to have multiple applications for the data, then we, of course, are tempted to go higher and higher quality. But yeah, IoT in general, some of the protocols are built around bad connectivity, but they're also built around the presumption of sending very little data. We're trying to send a lot and make sure that we don't send things twice. So yeah, I mean, that's the area where I'd love to have everyone sort of look at that, because the probably 4 digits worth of hours just spent by myself, like looking at how do we like continually build in the protocols there. And I would just be so proud to be able to share that with people.
So did you ever look at like the power, like benefit trade-off of doing feature detection on the audio before sending it off and just sending like the feature data for analysis rather than, or I don't know, maybe you're already doing that and you're not just sending the raw audio stream?
So with the newer developments that we'll talk about later on the Delta, like that is something that we are doing, though as much for privacy purposes as anything else. I do think that a lot of the reason why we were sending it was to make sure we didn't miss things. So it's the false negatives that we were most worried about when it came to threat detection. But yeah, absolutely. There are some situations now where we had built in the software to, if you're looking at a window of say like 1 or 2 seconds, and all you have to communicate over is SMS or like a satellite messaging system, which is not really sending any more than a few hundred bytes at a time, then you do you actually do want to kind of like serialize all that stuff just to detection and just send those positives if it's like a very high value. If it's like, a parrot that's squawking 100 times a day, not a big deal. But if it's a rare species that you know of is of very important value to the partner, then maybe you do want to verify it. But yeah, so we have a messaging system for being able to alert what the kind of metadata around what's happening in these areas are. But if there's a very high value or important one, you can request it and then it'll kind of serialize it and send it up slowly. And then it'll be like, a second or two of audio that takes a while to get up. But yeah, great question, man. Good question. But there's good reasons, as mentioned, why we were trying to make sure that we captured everything. And then even as we put it more on the device on the edge, why we would still kind of want to go for your approach for privacy purposes. To me, this is related to your question, but like there was so much during the years and we were trying to develop this thing and we were just jumping from country to country every 2 weeks and we're out there and we're walking for 8 hours a day out to get there. And I'm like, this is not scalable. Like, how are we going to do this? And that was when it finally hit me that even if it takes you like 6 hours to walk to a place and put up one of these devices, then suddenly that's like 6 hours someone doesn't have to do every day or like once a week. And so, yes, there is always going to be this like heavy lift in getting there and putting it up. But then it's a major, much less like of a burden on the people who are there. And the same goes for collecting data. So if you're going and walking that far out or, to put up a device that's collecting onto an SD card, you're ultimately going to have to go get it from there. So our goal is how can we reduce the number of trips that people have to make to these places, except when necessary.
So you have some sort of a way when you're capturing this data to alert local people, I assume, that something is going on. Although I would imagine it's always after the fact. If there is a 6-hour trip to get into a rainforest and you hear a chainsaw, you've picked up a chainsaw, you've uploaded this to the cloud, then someone might be alerted somewhere, but there isn't anything they can do to stop that activity at that moment. They simply know that it happened and probably where it happened. Is that correct?
Well, actually, first of all, the 6 to 8 hour walk, that's on the high end. Unfortunately, most of the places that are under threat are easier to get to, which is why they're under threat, because people can drive in. Most logging operations aren't like, surgical and fast. People be in there for days, if not longer at a time. And on the periphery, sometimes they'll be there for the entire day, I guess. So, but that's not to say that it's easy and a real-time response for all these. A lot of this data gets used to both prove the existence of a problem, begin to study where it is, and work directly with the partners to come up with a plan for how they should stop it. Whether they respond in real time is really at the discretion of the partners, despite the fact that that's often our preference if it's safe for them to do so. And so, yeah, the original vision of like chainsaw, get an alert, send people out, that is a best case scenario that is sometimes naive based upon the difference in capability or difference in, I guess, resources of the logging versus the people who are doing it. But it's always our goal. A lot of what we do is around, I'll call it kind of like collaboration with the people there to understand the problem and get them out there. And it often comes in the form, as you're suggesting, of patrols. But logging usually is not like a one-day operation. It's like something that people will go in instead of camps and get into it. The hardest problem that we face when it comes to threat detection is making sure that the people have enough information to confidently respond. And sometimes that takes months, if not years, to develop with them.
Yeah, I was wondering about your training process, how you train local people who may not be technically proficient.
Oh, there's a bit of that, although there's often a lot of excitement around it because the people don't often build technical tools for these groups, and they're all on smartphones. They're all pretty technically savvy people in their own way. And so to know that this is a system that's directly for them around this problem that they have taken responsibility for helps a lot. And so there's usually a few training sessions and then lots of coaching on WhatsApp. So our support team is really great at being able to make sure that they know how to use it. But those sort of side channels around support are really important for making sure that they interpret the data the same way that we do, because any number of things can come into play. And of course, they know the situation is often better than we do, but that can also lead to people come up with reasons that they shouldn't respond. And of course, we want to make sure that they do.
So they're basically getting an alert and then they have some sense of what maybe their best next step is. If they get an alert, like what would that alert say? Something like chainsaw heard, or, what would that look like?
Yes, we learned pretty quickly that you send any wrong alerts, that degrades a lot of trust in the system. Not because people don't trust you, but because they begin to allow themselves to believe that alerts can be wrong. And so it's important that we don't send any false alerts, which was, of course, a major challenge for quite a while until we got into much better machine learning models on that. But additionally, we have to show them the original data around what's there. So as you were saying, Phil, when there is like a positive, that audio must exist in the system for them to be able to listen to it and confirm. Because if they can't see it and imagine it on their own, then it's not just they don't believe it, it's that they're going into a situation that they feel like they have no personal information on. And that's not really fair, because there's a lot of indices that can come out of listening to audio that's beyond just the detection of a chainsaw or a dog bark or a gunshot. And so they get alert on their phone, with the Guardian app that's specifically for them. They will get a chance to listen into the audio, see the spectrogram of what's there, sort of see where the chainsaw is within it, listen to it as many times as they want. They'll be able to see the past alerts and where they're kind of clustered around and see it on a map. And then there's some ongoing communication between the team with us within the app as far as how they would respond. So yeah, it's both they get to see the kind of history of what's there as well as the real-time information.
Gotcha.
So you also have an app, Rainforest Connection app. Is this continuously recording and broadcasting from specific sites, or is it a recording that's being played later? Is it really real time?
Oh, it is real time. There's real-time streams coming out of that. So any Guardian that we put up that is actually online, not the kind that's talking over messaging with a satellite, but the ones that we put in places that have connection, is streaming that in real time. So at most, you're looking at like a couple minutes behind real time in terms of what's there. The downside of that, now rainforests are really noisy places. They're really different from morning to night to afternoon to all the rest. So there's like a pretty good chance that you're going to tune in at like an interesting moment, because that's like maybe 80% of the time. But also it's not curated, right? So anything can happen. And so the rest of the app is also like moments that we picked out, like the time when there was an earthquake and woke up all the spider monkeys, or like the last time the sun came up in Costa Rica, or any of these places around the world. There's these moments that can be curated by us as well as by machine learning that show up in the app, so that you can get those moments that you're looking for. And then our science team...
Kind of highlights.
Yeah, highlights. And our science team has also pulled out like a lot of these great examples of the species, because we're trying to highlight automatic detection of various species as well. So there's an educational element to the app as well. People will come to us and say, oh, it'd be great to meditate to this app. And there might be some streams within there where you could, or ones you want to sort of relax. But the truth is that the forest is kind of unpredictable. So you never know if a branch is going to break or if a bird's going to come peck at the microphone. All these things happen.
The transcendental chainsaw.
Right.
Well, there's some really surreal recordings. You have just amazing biodiversity, and you have gibbons, you have these animals. There's so much happening. You can hear 18 species and their chainsaw in the background, Yeah, we get a lot of that, where the animals, especially given their time of day, they'll stick to what they're doing. And then off in the distance, they'll be sort of impending doom on its way over.
Trouble in paradise.
Yeah. I mean, and the rainforest is a rough place. And I'm not going to put it out there.
I think I saw an article that said something about you were installing something in a rainforest and you had leeches crawling in your boots while you were up on top of a tree. Not much you can do about that at that moment, I assume.
Yeah, I guess I would have carried them to the top of the tree. So that's kind of a bit of vengeance in a sense, Leeches are surreal. Growing up in California, I didn't get to see a lot of leeches growing up, and especially the leeches in Southeast Asia are surreal, the way they kind of like poke out. It's almost like those eels in The Little Mermaid, the animated version, where they're kind of like looking around. It's like the lost souls. That's what the leeches kind of remind me of in Southeast Asia. But I'll take a leech over a tick any day.
Yeah, I guess. So it seems like all of these things that you've been doing in the past few years have led to this evolution of what we were going to talk about today, which is your newest product, I guess, Delta. Can you tell us a little bit about what Delta is all about?
Yeah, I'm really excited to. So much of this came out of the work in the forest and realizing how hard it was to build hardware for out there, and how we were always kind of limited by that environment. And I always believed very strongly that if we could get these audio sounds out of the forest to the world, that it would change people's hearts and minds. And we've seen that it has made a big difference with the app that we talked about. I still feel like there's an extension that we could go towards. When you listen in on the rainforest, it's just so foreign. It's not something you're familiar with, and you don't have as much that you can sort of relate to in that. The biodiversity, while incredible and diverse and beautiful, is still something that you can't necessarily see. And I think there's like an entry point that we can get for people where we are able to expose a lot of amazing biodiversity and stuff in their own backyards, much closer to home, while at the same time using this opportunity in a different environment, which is not this, top of the tree, to take steps forward on the hardware that we would like to see filter back into conservation. So all that to say that we have built an entirely new version of this hardware. To say that it comes out of the work around the Guardian is quite true, but we've taken some pretty bold steps in parallel directions or tangential directions, and for a few reasons. So like the Guardian was originally, got some great solar panels, but it is a plastic box, and this is what we call the Delta. The idea behind this is that we can make this possible for make this accessible to a consumer audience so that it goes in your backyard or anywhere when you're camping or the rest. It's made out of aluminum, so we're trying to be extra sustainable in most ways that we can. No lithium-ion batteries. And really, what are all the things that we can do when our goal is not conservationists and scientists? Although this is sort of works up to those standards there. But this raises a lot of questions. So you can't, in my mind, you can't just make a bioacoustic device, put it in a backyard and expect most people to care about it. So how do we find a way that listening to nature actually becomes useful and interesting in people's lives? And that's where a lot of this thing comes out of. Like, you need extra data points. You need to be able to know where the animals are. You need to be able to recognize certain individuals potentially and begin to attach stories to them. And on top of that, you need to build it to a standard that consumers will adhere to, which Phil can talk all about, I'm sure. The idea was that we could up our own standard by speaking to a consumer audience and then cycle that back into conservation. This is the Delta. It is essentially an ecoacoustic platform for everyone, with a focus on your backyard, focus on camping, focusing on the rest. There's a lot of the sort of features that we get into about why we built it as the way we did. But in the process, we hope to reach a new standard in conservation tech that we can then all make use of.
So inside this triangular device, you've got a hard drive.
Sure.
You've got a recording device. You've got Wi-Fi.
Yeah, so I can start with it. So again, the shape is kind of weird. The hole through the middle, it has a purpose. It's for expansion slots, but it's also partially because it extends a lot of places where you can put it. It begins with sound. You have these microphones in 3 directions. So you have sort of tri-directional sound up to 192 kilohertz, which allows you to hear quite a few, almost everything, I guess you could say. And they're all sort of capturing at the same time. There's also the addition to attach a hydrophone here on the bottom, or an extra microphone. That allows us to kind of map the directionality of sound and where it comes in from. Inside this, you have the ability to produce solar power at a pretty high efficiency. There's about 50 watt hours of battery so that it can continue to power itself for 2 or 3 days after you go down, but also you run it continuously. On the back, of course, we're able to, it does have Wi-Fi. It does have the ability with one of the add-ons to either satellite or 4G upload. But also just, this is an Ethernet connection, because there's a lot of situations where it's within, say, like, a few hundred meters of where you wanted to put it, and you can both power it and get your data connection through the Ethernet. Yeah, and then up here, you've got a USB slot for these add-ons. It has 2 camera mounts so that you can mount it on pretty much anything, although we include a lot of different mounts. And then you do have an SD card slot for if you do want to be able to sort of capture all of your audio and not just stream it up to the cloud. So we're really trying to take everything we've been building over the past few years, extend it by like 50% or more, maybe 2 or 3 times more, and then cram it all into this form factor and try and make it out of a more quality material that people can attach themselves to. This version here only has 3 of these entry points for microphones. The other one actually has 2 on each edge. So there's some olfactory gas sensors we're putting in, and hopefully room for many, many more sensors on top of that. And let's see, what else are we looking at here? Oh yeah, there's a lot of little niche features in here that we're trying to get in here. I always felt this was a great thing for listening to your backyard, but it always felt kind of sad to me to do that. You had to pick out your phone. So this thing will also broadcast sort of a short range FM station. So if you want to like put your phone in the other room when you go to bed and wake up to the sounds of your own backyard, you can do that through your FM radio.
With the 3 microphones on it, I was thinking it's definitely like more of a sense around or binaural type of recording then, where you hear it. If you were to play it back and listen to it in headphones, would it be sort of a stereo sound separated kind of experience?
That's the idea. Partially it's around, there's scientific reasons for it, and there's also, again, experiential reasons for it, as you mentioned. So we hope to do this as spatial audio. So you're able to really feel like you're there and kind of move through. And then additionally, because when you set the thing up, whether you have it there for a long time or a short period of time, we will map your garden. That helps us then to use some segmentation to say, oh, that's the fence, that's the oak tree, that's your front door, that's your wall with the light. So that when an animal shows up, we can use a few sort of assisted techniques as well to know where animals usually are based on where it's coming from, to say the squirrel was on the fence, the blackbird was in the oak tree. So we don't have to say like 360 degrees northwest, things like that. It allows us to put together a better user experience around it. But yes, the idea, a lot of this is around like, how do we make experiences? So with Rainforest Connection and the rest, we built the streaming app. We built some great tools in the past to be able to visualize audio. That was not ultimately an essential tool for the scientists who are our main audience. And so I want to take that mission onto consumers and to the rest, because I do think that the visualization of audio as like a rich sound source that's not just for hearing, it's for visualizing, it's for spatial recognition, and it's honestly for experience beyond that. Like, instead of presenting a report that says these were the 6 birds that were in your yard last night and the raccoons came through and they argue with the possum about the dog bowl that was there, this can be presented to you. Actually, even that is a little bit ambitious compared to what's out there, but we should be able to do these things when this device is released. You can also play the entire thing back to somebody in that spatial audio critique. You can have these sort of audio reports that are 30 seconds long that frankly pull all the highlights out of the last 24 hours. And that's kind of our goal.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's these little things that we wanted to do that I always wanted to try that would be hard. So like, the solar panels just sort of mount on there with magnets. Same is true for all the accessories. And, we did test these in the back of a truck at like 65 miles per hour. So there's actually a 3rd solar panel as well. And it sort of clips in there on the bottom. So a lot of these things we've been building for these rugged environments, can we rebuild them in a more consumer-friendly way? You can tell this one's been outside quite a bit, and still offer that to consumers in a way that they think is in line with what they want. Because sometimes sitting at the top of a tree trying to screw in the little screws can be dangerous for the people waiting at the bottom of the tree.
I would think so. So for those solar panels, does it come automatically with 3 solar panels, or do you buy them separately? Like, oh, I think I only need one, or how does that work?
So we'd always suggest 3, although if you put it up against a wall, you can only fit 2. The solar panels altogether are about 15 watts altogether, which is enough for, if you get a couple hours of sun, that's enough to run the thing for 24 hours. Yeah, so you can they'll come in 3s. They are an add-on because you don't need it. I don't think everyone needs solar panels. And if you have, it might not even be the best way to deploy it if you have like an Ethernet connection and the rest. When you get the device, it comes with 160 feet of cable, a power adapter, enough to mount the thing almost anywhere. And then, of course, everything else from there is an add-on. But the solar panels are exciting. I think they're great. They're certainly useful for deployable applications, but not necessary for everyone to use.
Do you foresee nature recording artists using this device possibly instead of some of the gear they use right now, or do you consider the quality to be comparable?
I think that's certainly our goal, and we're going to make sure that they have that they have their hands on it from the very, very beginning, which, by the way, the first devices will be available for people in September with Kickstarter launching next week. But yeah, we'll put them in their hands. That's a high bar to meet. And so we are very open to working with them to making sure it lives up to it. There is a difference. There's a fundamental difference in approach here that kind of would define my career over that. There's a lot that you don't know that helps you take the steps towards trying new things that can ultimately lead to a lot of great discoveries or a lot of great developments. A lot of that comes into this device. I would not have thought that directionality of audio was possible with this. We're working on a technique now that even though the MEMS microphones are very small, you wouldn't normally be able to detect infrasound based upon the distribution of them throughout the device. You can use kind of an array of microphones techniques to potentially pick out infrasound as well. That's something we're working on within the software and hardware of it. So there's a lot of like projects that are in the works around this that will come out of it. But yes, I would love to put this in the hands of nature recording enthusiasts. I can't wait for them to tell us everything that's wrong with it, and then hopefully bring them around on half those things over time.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like locally, even, someone like Dan Dugan.
Oh, he's the best. He's the best.
Yeah.
But even so, because this thing is able to record up to 190 kilohertz, again, 3 of those channels are taken up by these microphones here, but you can put an extra microphone on this one as well. So this can be, and in many ways, if you're capturing audio onto like an SD card or something like that, this can be a great way to either do that or to stream it at the same time. So be able to stream audio at 190 kilohertz is probably a special feature as far as people are concerned in and of itself. And we've actually had to take some interesting software steps to enable that as well.
So the same question about the level of skill for people who are not nature recordists, who might just want to put this in their yard and record what's going on. And there are people who do this right now, right? They put on YouTube channels for cats that show 3 hours of birds eating birdseed or something. Do you have like a guide or something that you're going to be working on, a training program, maybe YouTube channel or something where you're going to show people how to use this and optimize it?
Well, we're working with a number of influencers to be the first users of this device for people, both in the launch of our campaign and when they get it. And so they will kind of be walking people through how to do it. There's a number of different applications for it. So if you're a bird watcher, then yes, it's going to be able to tell you real time where the birds were. You can get those reports we talked about, listen to where they were. At the same time, there's other applications for consumers where we're trying to actually use the data coming out of this to tell AI stories that attach personalities to the animals that allow you to get to know them through personalized stories about them and what we know about you. So there's different applications that we'll be working on for different people, but ultimately the setup is as easy as, you put the thing where you want, which again, you can leave it there forever, or you can take it with you when you move. But when you set the thing up, what you want to do is give it some kind of awareness of where it is that you can relate to. So you set it up, you take your phone, you rotate your phone 360 degrees, it gets this panorama of what's there. That then it will begin to map it'll see a door, it'll see a fence, it'll begin to map what's in these different directions to actual things you can recognize. So we can refer to those things in our descriptions. And then on top of that, we will, because you're only taking that one image, but the thing is recording nighttime, daytime, morning, afternoon, we will then be able to redraw that in the time of day and the season that the things are actually captured in. So that all of that is sort of reapplications of AI, not to mention the generative AI and storytelling, but we're largely trying to do world building from the point of view of the device and make sure that you can sort of see what's there, understand it. And walking people through that and making sure we got it right is a huge part of the first year.
So it'll be controlled through an app on your phone, is that correct?
That's correct. So this thing is called the Delta, but the overall technology is called Squibbin. That's the name of the organization and what we sort of hope, which is a whole story in of itself. Yes, this is you use the Squibbin app to connect to it. And the Squibbin app can have different audiences, whether it's for bedtime stories for your child, for following particular animals, for listening, for going back, for sharing streams with others. That's the sort of portal into all of this.
What's the name of the app again? Sorry, could you?
Squibbon, Squibbon, which is the name of the whole effort, actually.
Is it a callback to the gibbons that initially inspired you?
Yes, thank you very much. It's inspired by this show called The Future is Wild, which is pretty niche, from like the early 2000s, which was a speculative evolution show where they looked into the future and said, okay, where is wildlife going to go in the future? And the show kind of ended without too much fanfare on cephalopods, squids, having actually come out of the ocean, living in the forest, along with fish as well. And the most intelligent ones were, of course, cephalopods and the squibbon. So the implication, if not statement, of the show was that the next super intelligent civilization on Earth after humans will likely be cephalopods, and those were the squibbon. So this represents the fact, even the delta represents like a change in biodiversity that represents our moment in Earth's evolution that we all live in, and our ability to measure it. But the squibbon idea represents this idea that life will continue, that there's intelligence to come, and that we have a lot of responsibility in trying to make sure that it can, even beyond our own existence.
Well, that's AI right there.
It is.
So what is the approximate cost that you're anticipating if someone wants one of these devices?
Sure. So when this thing launches next Tuesday, the 20th on Kickstarter, if you're there for the first day, you can get it for $279, which for the build quality, I believe to be pretty incredible. It's your first backyard computer. And then from there, the prices may go up by the day. But if you're there at the very beginning, you can get it. And if you want to get it by Christmas time, it costs a little bit more, but then the rest of them will all be delivered in March. And it's a great companion to any other sort of bird feeders you have out there or the rest. But this goes well beyond birds as well. It's mammals, it's insects, it's amphibians, my favorites. There's a lot in there.
Well, you mentioned in the past that you had, collaborated with Cornell. I'm curious, does the app have tie-ins to things like iNaturalist or those kind of communities?
We haven't yet figured out those collaborations yet. It's important to point out that Cornell, although we do have a lot of collaborations with them now, at the time they were really just helping us out. They just really threw us a bone, and that's a function of how cool they are. And of course, they've come a long way. Yes, the detections of species coming off of this will be fed both into our platform called Arbonne, Rainforest Connection platform, and then also into Cornell as well. So if anyone wants to opt in on that, they will be able to send their data automatically to all these different databases, because our goal is to get this out there. Anyone who wants to be able to study it should be able to. We put a big premium on privacy. So there's a lot built into this around, it's one thing to put devices off in the forest. That's one thing. To put them in people's backyards raises a lot of important concerns, amongst them privacy, and also just like sort of pollution of anthropogenic noises as well. So human voices, the moment that they show up, the device just discards them immediately. So human voices don't even make it into the model. It goes through a model, but then the moment they're detected, they get discarded. We don't want people to have to worry about that. And then we're also working on being able to train a model for everyone's sort of environment, if they opt into it, where we can pick up the specific noises of dogs or motors or air conditioners, all that sort of thing that sort of pollutes one's environment, and turn that down so you can get kind of like the inhuman soundscape of your backyard or wherever you are.
That's what I was wondering about, is that there's often a lot of aviation noise no matter where you go. And so it sounds like you're not eliminating it, but you're reducing the gain on those kinds of sounds.
Well, I think that we're going to learn a lot by putting it out there. So we can make a lot of guesses about how it's going to be. But I think that ultimately every individual, and we can do this with federated learning as well on the edge, so we don't have to have all of your data. We want people to have their own sort of custom noise pollution filter, because it's going to be different in everyone's environment. So if you have a lot of planes, if you live next to a highway, these are things that you might be used to, but when you listen to them on microphone, it really gets in the way. So if we're going to be able to sort of tune out those noises for everybody and have them actually control it, I think it can help. So a custom noise filter, a custom anthropogenic noise filter for your own environment.
Oddly enough, I can also see a case where some people might be interested in this device for exactly the opposite. Instead of nature sounds, they might want to record the anthropogenic sounds. And what comes to mind, for example, are a couple of different groups that we've interviewed. One is the New York City folks who are going crazy from constant tourist helicopter noise over their homes.
Stop the Chop is the name of that group.
Stop the Chop. And another group in Cranston, Rhode Island, where they are having gunfire noise because of a police training academy that's near a residential area and some schools. So for those groups, I would say this is not the intention for this device, but I'm wondering if in the future it could actually be adapted for those collection of anthropogenic noises, for making the case for noise ordinances or changes in public spaces or something like that.
I think it's a great idea. Again, we have our goal, which is on the biodiversity, but because we're capturing all that, and we do intend to both filter it out, and by filtering it out, you've also identified it. I think that we would love to work with somebody who, any organization, who actually wants for all that information to be sent to them. I think that we're trying to avoid making that a focus of the user experience around the device and avoid people getting subpoenaed, getting, these things being sources of information that they don't associate with the product. But because it's being generated, someone can easily opt in. All that data can be sent to a partner who's particularly interested in that. I would love to make an open call for anybody who wants to be that partner, and we could do it. We probably won't hang on to that data, though, to be fair.
So you've had a lot of experience, with Guardian collaborating with the local communities and helping, and I assume that partnership allows them to define their preferences in their community for how the data is used and how for detecting logging or whatever. So when this comes into the domestic sphere, how do you think through that? You've mentioned a lot of the privacy concerns. So how do you think through that? Is there a partner organization, or is this just within yourselves? Like, how do you even think through the philosophical or the existential impacts of the ubiquitous surveillance or law enforcement or anything?
It's a good question. It's a bit of a challenge because we have a goal of collecting huge amounts of data on biodiversity on this planet for everyone to be able to access. Not just us, but like hundreds of years from now, we want people to be able to look back and study biodiversity here. We also want to protect privacy and we want people to be in control of that. So it's up to us to incentivize them to share the data, but only the things that we're sort of focused on, like the animal data, and offer ways for them to not know that the entire record of the last 6 months of their backyard are sitting in a cloud somewhere. So we are looking at ways of being able to store these things both locally at your home. If you're able to run servers on a computer that can pick it up locally on the device, as opposed to up in the cloud and only send certain elements. But it's going to be there'd be gradations of what someone is into, and we'll try and find ways to incentivize more sharing, but not entirely rely on that assumption, because we don't want to distract from what the product is for, which is to connect you to what's in your backyard, to allow you to play a part in something that's global on a sort of a global survey, but not get into the ultimately spiraling conversations about everything that's happening in these places that is not related to those two questions. Yeah, I think that we're just getting started on this, and there's a lot of the great ideas out there, because privacy, open data, how to store one's own data, how to self-serve these are answered questions that we just have to choose the right solutions to apply. And then also put them in a way that people who aren't following the blogs of cybersecurity can feel good about. But ultimately, we really want to make sure that this product is about biodiversity and the ways we can connect to it. While certainly the data can be used for the things that you mentioned, Carrie, we don't want to keep it from being used for that. We don't want that to be a part of the experience of users. And we want to use it to incentivize like improved infrastructure that allows animals to come in. So we want people to be focused on like how many more animals you had this month than the last, and the ways in which you can sort of coach them in that.
And as like a business, or I guess specifically for this Kickstarter, is the money raised from that sufficient to cover the costs of materials and construction? So in other words, is the business model one that selling the product itself is sufficient to support the business, or is there like further usage of the data, monetizing data later? I mean, I know a lot of it's open, so it's not as useful there, but I'm just curious if that is like, if there's an intentional choice around that, or you see a vision in the future of how, this can be supported.
So I would say that the ambitions of what we're trying to accomplish go beyond just the sale of hardware. That's not to say that you're going to be charged for using it. I don't think that's going to be the case, for at least for the first group of users. But there are going to be a lot of sort of features, some of which we mentioned here, that may become available through sort of add-ons. Ultimately, we want to find that there's so many uses for this data that don't involve people's privacy. We want to take people out of people aren't the product here. It might be the biodiversity is the product, but we are so excited. What we mentioned about experiences and even storytelling are just like a couple levels of ones that go 5 or 6 high. What are all the ways in which animals become like the sensors that allow us to know more about our environment? Is there any reason to put up 100 sensors in your backyard when you have 100 eyes and ears that are actually talking and telling you about what's there? Like almost the internet of biodiversity that's out there. And that's what we want to be able to capitalize upon. That data, I would assume, has value to people. And we want to make sure that your data is first for you. And only then, after you decide it's for somebody else, can it be for anybody else? But yeah, we're open to it. Yeah.
I think it's great. I don't know if there's anything else in particular that you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was excited to talk to you both about was some of the innovations we've had to press on actually codecs. I don't know if that's too technical for this, but so much of the way in which audio is sent and compressed these days is using psychoacoustics, like what can people hear? And those are some pretty amazing codecs out there now, especially the open ones. But on top of that, because we're focusing in science and bioacoustics, much of the interesting stuff are things that we can't hear. And even the difference between, say, like, lossless versus lossy audio, within the human range, there's arguments about whether those things make a difference. At the much higher ranges and lower ranges in infrasonic and ultrasonic areas, how would we find a way to actually compress audio, let alone send it? Because we talked about being able to stream 192 kilohertz in 4 channels, let alone 1. That's actually not feasible even over a normal Wi-Fi connection. So a lot of what we've been working on over the past few years, both for storage purposes as well as for streaming purposes, are what are the ways in which we can sort of create codecs or adapt existing psychoacoustic codecs for bioacoustics so that it goes well beyond the human hearing range. And we're implementing that for the first time within this product to actually stream an adapted version of the Opus codec that's for, ecoacoustics, bioacoustics, and hopefully so much more, with the standard being that it still has to be able to detect all the species in these high ranges. That is 100% open source, even if it's not shared yet. And we would really hope for more input on it, because all the work we did over the past few years and the ideas that I had around that, I'm sure are about to be thrown to the wind based upon some innovations in AI, machine learning, or the general community. So we look forward to that, because I think that when we begin to define the world and data collection, especially on the compression side in audio, beyond what people can hear, that's when the really amazing stuff comes out, So I think that on the Rainforest Connection side, we've really pressed what's possible in terms of data collection and analysis. With the extra data we should collect from this, I'm hoping we can get into this idea of like ecoacoustics, even in your own environment. What are the ways in which the animals are adapting that you haven't noticed, that no one's noticed, that only comes out through knowing their behavior and knowing their repeated behavior over time? Those adaptations can actually teach you about ways that you might want to adapt to your own environment. And so beyond like biomimicry, where we're designing cars and materials based upon animal bodies, we should be able to design all sorts of things based upon animal behaviors, because in every species, there's trillions of iterations of trial and error that went into the way that they react. And now under pressure up against each other, that's when these things come out. So I'm excited for that being possible in the future, both as a source of solutions, if not general personal inspiration.
Well, I think we'll put your inquiry out there into the podcast, and so many different people listen to this. Someone may have some ideas about how to hear those sounds that are beyond the range of human hearing.
All right.
I'd like to thank Topher White for joining us in this episode, and I'm really excited about this new tool, Delta. As we discussed, there's a Kickstarter campaign starting in June, and you can get on board early with this project. As soon as I get the link for it, I'll post it on the Soundproofist website. Thanks for listening. And to learn more about the Rainforest Connection, visit their website at rfcx.org. And to learn more about noise and soundproofing, visit soundproofist.com.